On the loneliest stretch of road in North Dakota, where the winds howl and the shadows stretch longer than midnight, there lies an old abandoned house. For decades, it stood as a forgotten relic, a monument to a past buried deep under layers of mystery and sorrow. They say that the house is cursed, that anyone who dares to enter it is doomed to an unspeakable fate. It was on a moonless night that a young couple, David and Sarah, traveling through the area, found themselves lost and desperate for shelter. Their car had broken down several miles back, and the biting cold gnawed at them despite the layers of clothes they wore. "We should try to find shelter," David said, his voice trembling slightly. "We can figure out the rest in the morning." With no other options, they trudged forward, and soon, the silhouette of the old house loomed before them like a ghostly guardian. Sarah hesitated, clutching David's arm. "I don't like the look of this place, David," she whispered, her breath misting in the frigid air. "We don't have a choice, Sarah," David replied, pulling her toward the creaking gate. "We'll be all right. Just for tonight?" The moment they crossed the threshold, an icy shiver ran down their spines. The house seemed to exude an unnatural chill, the air thick with a sense of dread. They pushed the heavy oak door open, the hinges groaning in protest, and stepped inside. The interior was a decayed reflection of its former self. Dust-covered furniture, tattered curtains, and a grand chandelier that looked as though it hadn't seen light in centuries greeted them. It was a time capsule of a forgotten era, every corner whispering tales of sorrow and despair. "Let's see if we can find some blankets," David suggested, trying to shake off the unease that gnawed at him. They moved from room to room, each one more unsettling than the last. In one of the bedrooms, they found an old trunk filled with moth-eaten blankets and quilts. They gathered as many as they could carry and made their way back to the main room. As they settled down, a strange scratching sound echoed through the house. Sarah's eyes widened, and she clutched David's hand tightly. "Did you hear that?" David nodded, listening intently. The scratching grew louder, more insistent, and seemed to be coming from the walls themselves. He picked up an old candlestick, holding it as a makeshift weapon, and moved toward the source of the noise. Suddenly, the lights flickered and died, plunging them into darkness. Sarah gasped, her fear palpable. David fumbled with a flashlight from his backpack, its weak beam creating eerie shadows on the decaying wallpaper. "Who's there?" David called out, his voice echoing back at him. "Show yourself." For a moment, the scratching stopped, replaced by an ominous silence that weighed heavily on them. Then, with a bone-chilling creak, one of the walls began to slide open, revealing a hidden passageway. A cold, putrid smell wafted out, turning their stomachs. David turned to Sarah, his face a mask of determination. "Stay here. I'm going to check it out." Sarah shook her head fervently. "No, David. We should leave. Now." But David was already stepping into the darkness of the passageway. The flashlight's beam barely penetrated the inky blackness, revealing narrow, oppressive walls that seemed to close in around him. As he ventured further, the smell grew stronger, almost suffocating. The passageway opened into a small, decrepit room. In the center of the room lay a large, ancient book, its cover bound in cracked leather and adorned with unsettling symbols. Unable to resist, David reached for the book. The moment his fingers touched its surface, a blood-curdling scream filled the air. He froze, his heart pounding in his chest. "David, help me!" Sarah's voice rang out from the main room, filled with terror. He spun on his heels and raced back, finding Sarah cornered by a shadowy figure with glowing red eyes, looming menacingly over her. David lunged at the figure, swinging the flashlight wildly, but his blows passed through it as if it were made of smoke. The figure laughed, a sound that chilled him to his core. "You should not have come here," it hissed. "Now you cannot leave." Desperate, David grabbed Sarah's hand and pulled her toward the door, their only hope of escape. But as they ran, the house seemed to come alive, doors slamming shut, floorboards twisting and turning beneath their feet. They stumbled and fell, the malevolent presence closing in around them. They reached the front door, but it refused to budge, sealed by an unseen force. "You cannot escape your fate," the voice whispered, echoing through the hallways. David and Sarah clung to each other, knowing their doom was inevitable. The shadows encircled them, and the last thing they saw was the glowing red eyes, burning with malice, before darkness consumed them. And so, the house claimed its latest victims. Their car would be found many days later, an empty husk amid the desolate landscape. The house remains, a silent sentinel, waiting patiently for the next souls to wander into its grasp. Locals speak of David and Sarah in hushed tones, adding their names to the long list of those who vanished within the cursed walls. Beware, traveler, for if you find yourself on that lonely road in North Dakota, and the old house beckons you with its eerie stillness, turn away. For once you cross its threshold, you may never return. There was a time, not too long ago, when the small town of Elders Hollow was known for its lush forests and tranquil atmosphere. People would travel from miles away to bask in the serene beauty of the place. However, that was before the shadow came. Just as dusk falls swiftly in these parts, so did the happiness and tranquility once held so dearly among its residents. The tale begins on a crisp autumn evening. Old Man Samuel, the town's unofficial storyteller, had just finished recounting tales of yore around a campfire. His expertly woven words left listeners both entranced and comforted. The embers of the fire flickered out, but the memory of his stories kept everyone warm as they retired for the night. However, it wasn't his tales that the townsfolk should have remembered, it was the ancient warnings hidden deep within them. Week after week, an eerie mist descended upon Elders Hollow. The sort of mist that seemed to whisper your name and send shivers down your spine. Birds ceased their songs, and even the rustling leaves sounded like they held dark secrets. Legend had it that the lands were once cursed, a pact made by desperate souls who long ago tried to cheat death. A pact that demanded a blood toll which, until now, had been forgotten by time. One fateful night, just as the clock struck 12, a chilling scream echoed through the hollow. The source was traced to the widow Merrick's old farmhouse on the outskirts of the town. She had been a reclusive woman ever since her husband mysteriously disappeared a decade ago. Her home, once a hub of activity, now stood as a desolate relic clinging to memories of happier days. A group of brave townsfolk, led by Brad and Ellen, the town's young and intrepid couple, ventured to Widow Merrick's farmhouse. Upon reaching, they found the house steeped in darkness, its front door left ajar. Inside, chaos reigned. Furniture was upturned, and a thick layer of dust seemed to have settled in a matter of minutes. The air was suffused with an almost tangible presence, making it difficult to breathe, and even more challenging to muster the courage to move forward. As they tiptoed through the house, Ellen's sensitive ears caught the faintest sound of whispering. It was coming from the attic. Gathering their wits, Brad and Ellen led the group upstairs. The attic door was surprisingly cold, bearing marks of nails and scratches seemingly made in desperation. With a collective deep breath, they pushed open the door, revealing a scene they would never forget. Widow Merrick was seated in an old rocking chair, her once comforting presence now reduced to skeletal remains, her hollow eyes staring into nothingness. In her lap, a crumpled journal lay. Brad picked it up with trembling hands and started reading aloud, hoping it would provide some answers. It has begun. The pact we made in ignorance has come to claim its due. The shadows have come for our souls. There is no escaping it, the mark has already been cast upon us. Suddenly, the temperature in the attic plummeted. Their breaths turned to visible puffs, and an oppressive silence filled the room. Before anyone could react, a shadowy figure emerged from the darkness. Though indistinguishable in form, its presence evoked a primal terror, an instinctive understanding that there was no escaping whatever it represented. Brad and Ellen barely managed to retreat, gathering the terrified group to flee down the stairs. But the house had changed, its very structure seemed to warp and twist to trap them within its grasp. Every door led to another hallway, every window showed the same cursed landscape, even if it did open out to thin air. Amidst their frantic escape, Ellen remembered something Old Man Samuel had said, a detail about an ancient clearing in the forest where the original pact was believed to have been made. If they could reach it, there might be a chance, albeit slim, to break the curse. She grabbed Brad by the arm and whispered her plan. He nodded, understanding their only hope was to confront the evil rather than evade it. With a resolve forged from desperation, they made their way out of the farmhouse. The mist outside had thickened, curling around them like cold, clammy fingers. The forest was darker than ever, and it felt as though the very trees were watching their every move. Navigating through the oppressive atmosphere, they finally reached the clearing the next dawn. Ancient stones formed a circle, at its center a dilapidated altar. Brad and Ellen approached, placing Widow Merrick's journal upon it. As if on cue, the shadows from the mist took form, surrounding them. An ethereal voice, neither male nor female, echoed through the clearing. "Why do you disturb our slumber? The pact demands its due." Trembling, Ellen responded, "We didn't know, we weren't the ones who made the pact. Our ancestors did, in their desperation. Please, let us find another way to repay the debt." Silence followed her plea, then the voice returned, heavy with ancient wisdom and cruelty. "One life to break the curse. Sacrifice willingly given." The shadows closed in, leaving no doubt that any hesitation would mean futile resistance. Brad, whose determination had transformed from courage to acceptance, stepped forward. "If it will save them, take me." The shadows engulfed him, and as dawn's first light pierced through the mist, the whispers grew faint. The curse lifted, and the mist began to dissipate. Brad's eyes met Ellen's one last time, a silent goodbye etched into their gaze. Elders Hollow was free but forever changed. The sacrifice of one brave soul ensured the rest could once more live in peace. Yet, the shadows left a mark on the land, a cautionary tale reminding future generations of the dark secrets held within ancient pacts and the cost of trying to cheat fate. Old Man Samuel's stories were never quite the same after that. They carried a weight, a reminder of the night courage battled darkness and the ultimate price that was paid. And so, the legend of Elder's Hollow lived on, a tapestry of horror stitched with threads of bravery and sacrifice.